Okay, moving on to the next segment of today's show, there was actually an article I saw on the Score over the weekend, and I thought I would talk about it. And it was a very interesting question, and that question was, out of the 12 teams that have not won a Super Bowl, rank them from 1 to 12 in terms of teams, how close they are. And I took a look at their list, and then I actually made my own list and started to compare them. So I want to talk about the big differences on both of our lists and, how exactly they differ and are similar to each other. So without further ado, here we go. Boys, hit the music. All right, starting off with team number 12, and that is the Jacksonville Jaguars. And even though the Jaguars do have some talent on their team, they don't really seem that close to winning anything, so they are my number 12 team. They do have Gardner Minshew, who is obviously much better than anticipated last season, but it is hard to really imagine this guy being the Jaguars' savior and a guy that is eventually going to lead the Jaguars to a Super Bowl. So I understand the Jaguars and their defense were very successful when Blake Bortles was their quarterback, and we know, like, deep down, Blake Bortles really isn't any good. But at the same time, most of the time you need a quarterback in order to win a Super Bowl. And when you look at the Jaguars, I don't know if Gardner Minshew is going to be able to do that. I don't know if their defense is good enough. And this franchise just hasn't really been going in the right direction at all. This was once a great defense that lost Calais Campbell. Ngakoue is likely gone. And that run to the championship game, the AFC championship game in 2017, just feels like a really, really long time ago. So the Jaguars are number 12 on my list. They are basically a lock for a top 5 pick, I think. I really do believe that. So the Jaguars are number 12. Also, the Score had them at number 12. The team at number 11 that I had, that the Score actually also had at number 11, is the Carolina Panthers. And we know that the Panthers are going to be under first-year head coach Matt Rule, and basically kind of similar to the Jaguars, everyone from their last good team is gone. That 2015 NFC Championship team that ended up going to the Super Bowl, they're looking for a new identity. Teddy Bridgewater is going to be their new quarterback, and I like Christian McCaffrey, but I don't think Teddy Bridgewater is a guy that could win you a Super Bowl. He's a good quarterback, but I don't necessarily know if he's going to be worth all of the money he's getting in free agency. And Carolina, I think Matt Rule is going to end up being a pretty solid hire. I think eventually they'll be good, but right now they really aren't close to a Super Bowl. There's a reason why Matt Rule and the contract he signed was for 7 years. And when you sign a coach to a 7-year contract, basically what you're saying is that, okay, we don't expect to be great in year one, and that's okay. I think eventually Carolina will get there. They're just not really close. Number 10, the same team that I had at number 10. And I promise it will get different. Don't worry. That would be the Cincinnati Bengals. And if Joe Burrow could become a star, then the Cincinnati Bengals are ultimately going to, skyrocket on this list. I actually don't think the Bengals are that far off. Once again, if Joe Burrow is the guy we think he is. With Burrow, Mixon, a good young running back, a receiving core of Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins and Auden Tate, not to mention A.J. Green, who hopefully will be healthy. Also, they bring back Jonah Williams, who was their first-round pick in 2019, but he missed all of last season due to injury. And the defense did make some improvements. So I don't really know what to expect from the Cincinnati Bengals, especially this season. But there are definitely franchises in a worse spot. And I don't think they're really that far off from being that good. Once again, they're still super young, so I'm going to keep them at number 10, which isn't really anything that stands out or is mind-blowing. But I actually think if Joe Burrow works out, this team is not that far away. So I'm going to have them at number 10. At number 10. Moving on to the team that is number 9. That would be the Detroit Lions, and also the Score had the Lions at number 9. And the thing is, and we've had this conversation about the Lions on this show many times before, is that I just don't know what the trajectory of this team is and if they're going in the right direction. Because they have Matthew Stafford as your quarterback, and theoretically, the Detroit Lions should be a top 10 offense. With some of the names they have, like Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones and Matthew Stafford, and they bring in DeAndre Swift. That, nucleus, with apparently a defensive coach in Matt Patricia, there is no reason why he shouldn't at least be decent. And I understand they play in a tough division, but at the same time, the Detroit Lions recently have never really been close, and I don't know if that's ever going to change. They have a solid receiving core, but Detroit's supporting cast is kind of lacking. The Lions' running game really did struggle last year, but you hope DeAndre Swift kind of fixed that. And Matt Patricia, I understand he won some championships as the New England Patriots defensive coordinator, but I have a tough time really seeing Detroit winning a Super Bowl with Matt Patricia as their head coach. It just hasn't really worked out yet, and I don't see what exactly is going to change that. I have Detroit at number 9. At number 8, give me the LA Chargers. Once again, I think sometimes we forget this team has a bunch of talent, but I just don't know if they have a quarterback on their roster right now that is really good enough to win them a championship. We still have no idea what Justin Herbert is. I think if you give the Chargers a good quarterback and you say right now, all right, guaranteed, like you give them like if you put Matt Ryan on the Chargers, I think they could win the Super Bowl. I believe that. I really do. I think around the quarterback position, they're that talented. But at the same time, they just don't have the quarterback for them. I cannot see any way Tyrod Taylor will ever win the LA Chargers a Super Bowl. Can Justin Herbert? Maybe, but I haven't seen anything really that is going to show me that. And even if Justin Herbert does develop and become great, that's not going to happen until at least 2 or 3 years down the line. So I have the Chargers at number 8. Coming in at number 7 in terms of teams that are closest to winning a Super Bowl ring. This is going to make a lot of people upset, and the score had this team actually at number 3 on their list, so it's a little bit of a disagreement, but I'm going to say the Tennessee Titans. And the reason being is there is no way Ryan Tannehill is ever winning the Tennessee Titans a Super Bowl. I'm 1,000% confident in that statement. And I understand Derrick Henry carried them to the playoffs last year, and they were actually really close to winning a Super Bowl last year. But at the same time, I just can't see Ryan Tannehill winning a Super Bowl. You saw in that playoff game against Kansas City that once the Chiefs got up by a couple touchdowns, the game was over. Ryan Tannehill was never going to be able to throw and go match mano-a-mano with Patrick Mahomes. So I just cannot see Ryan Tannehill ever winning the Tennessee Titans a Super Bowl. That's why I have them at number 7 on my list. Coming in at number 6 on my list, I'm going to have the Cleveland Browns. And the Browns are a team, we all know they haven't won a Super Bowl. And I actually don't think they're that far off. The only problem is quarterback. Baker Mayfield is, the Browns have to figure out if this guy's the future or not. And I loved what he did his rookie year. I actually think he was legitimately good. But the problem was, last year was just really disappointing. And the excuses are kind of out the window now. You have a new head coach. We all know Freddie Kitchens was awful last year, but now Baker Mayfield doesn't have the excuse. They bring in Austin Hooper to go along with Njoku, with OBJ, with Jarvis Landry. They also, very importantly, improve their offensive line. So the Browns have all the talent in the world to be a possible Super Bowl contender. The problem is we haven't seen it before, so there's no reason to believe it will ever happen. But it's going to be very interesting to see what exactly happens with Cleveland and the future of the Browns. Okay, moving on to the team that I have at number 5 on my list. And that would be a team that actually was in the Super Bowl a couple years ago, and that would be the Atlanta Falcons. And once again, I actually don't think this team is that far off. When you look at the Falcons roster on paper, you kind of say to yourself, okay, this team really isn't that far off from winning a championship. And I totally understand why you would say that. Matt Ryan, Todd Gurley, Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, Hayden Hurst, who they got in trade from the Ravens. But at the same time, kind of similar to the Browns, I'm just never going to trust Dan Quinn to coach a good team. What has he done since they blew that Super Bowl lead? Absolutely nothing. And the Falcons are one of those teams where no matter how much talent they have, I'm not going to predict them to win a Super Bowl until I see with my own eyes. I've just been down that road so many times. But if Dan Quinn wants to prove me wrong, go out there and win the NFC South this year. We know Tampa Bay is very good. We know New Orleans is very good. But at the same time, you have the talent on this roster to compete with them. Let's go. If you're a good coach, I want to go see it. Your team should really be number 1 or 2 on this list, but you're number 5 because you haven't shown me anything to begin with. I have the Atlanta Falcons at number 5 on this list. Moving on to my team that I have at number 4 on this list. This is actually a team that made the postseason last year, and that is the Buffalo Bills. And kind of similar to the Browns, kind of similar to the Chargers, kind of similar to the Bengals, I just don't trust the Buffalo Bills quarterback. Everyone loves Josh Allen, and I heard people saying he's the most underrated quarterback in the league, and everyone is saying the Buffalo Bills are basically a lock to win the AFC East. And maybe they do. I love Sean McDermott as a coach. I love their defense. I love their offensive line. But at the same time, you all saw what happened in that playoff game against Houston. The two stats that I love to use while grading how good a quarterback are is passing percentage and yards per attempt. Josh Allen ranked at the bottom of the league in both of those categories. I think he needs to be better by a mile if the Bills ever want to come close to winning a Super Bowl. And the thing is, besides quarterback, they're not that far away. I just don't know if you could rely on a quarterback like Josh Allen, who most of his production comes from running the ball, and his inaccuracy is a big issue, man. I just can't see him ever winning a Super Bowl for the Bills because accuracy just isn't really a trait you could teach like that. Moving on to the team I have at number 3, that would be the Arizona Cardinals. And I understand they have a young quarterback. I understand that they have a young roster, and I would be very surprised if they win a Super Bowl this year. But I'll say this. I love Kyler Murray's long-term potential, man. I think this kid is going to be an absolute star. I think before his career is over, Kyler Murray will win an MVP. I'm confident in that statement. They bring back Kenyon Drake, who was awesome for them down the stretch. Oh, yeah, and they bring in probably the best wide receiver in football in DeAndre Hopkins. They have a young coach that should hopefully be there for a while. And Arizona, I just like the trajectory of their team. They, I love Kyler Murray. Larry Fitz is still there. They have a good young running back, a good young receiver in his prime in Hopkins. They need to get better on defense. But I think Kyler Murray is the kind of quarterback that could win you a Super Bowl and go on that, superstar type run. I have Arizona at number 3 on this list. And speaking of quarterbacks, at number 2 on this list, give me the Houston Texans. I know Bill O'Brien isn't the greatest coach, and he's certainly had his problems in big-time games, but give me the Houston Texans, man. If you have a quarterback named Deshaun Watson on your team, who I believe is one of the 3 or 4 best quarterbacks in the National Football League, you are not that far off from winning a Super Bowl. That's how good he is. We literally discussed this on the podcast last week. I don't trust the Houston Texans' surrounding pieces. I don't trust their roster. I don't trust their coach. I think their secondary is awful. I think their offensive line is awful. But at the same time, when you have a quarterback like Deshaun Watson on your roster, you are never out of any game. And Bill O'Brien is lucky to have a quarterback like him. If Houston could ever figure out their front office and they could, just continue to make okay to decent moves and just somehow improve their team, and if their owner ever realizes that Bill O'Brien should not ever have been selected as the general manager of the Houston Texans, this team could win a Super Bowl this year. I believe that. But the problem is, Bill O'Brien just isn't a very good GM, and he isn't a great coach. But when you have Deshaun Watson, you're never out of it. I have Houston at number 2. And at number 1, I'm going to have to agree with the score and say the Minnesota Vikings. They have the most balanced team out of anyone on this list. Can Kirk Cousins win a Super Bowl? No. He hasn't shown me anything to make me see that. But at the same time, he's not awful. He's really showed you this past year that he could win a playoff game, and not a lot of people really expected the Minnesota Vikings to win that game. They have an elite running back in Dalvin Cook. They bring in Justin Jefferson to replace Stephon Diggs and go with Adam Thielen. Their offensive line was better than expected last year. And on defense, they're going to have to, replace a bunch of the guys they lost. But at the same time, their roster is very balanced. They have a good coach, and I would put Minnesota as my number 1 team that is closer to winning a Super Bowl that hasn't won a Super Bowl yet. So once again, to review the list, I have the Vikings 1, Texans 2, I have the Bills 3, the Cardinals 3, the Bills 4, the Falcons 5, the Browns 6, the Titans 7, the Chargers 8, the Lions 9, the Bengals 10, the Panthers 11, and the Jaguars 12. And that's it for this segment.